The setup. The ivory envelope felt heavier than it should have in Victoria Sterling's manicured hands. The Crimson Ball, Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala, had been her event for 12 years. She had planned the seating arrangements, coordinated with the florists, and charmed the city's elite into opening their wallets for worthy causes. Now, 8 months after her divorce, she stared at the invitation like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. "You don't have to go," her assistant Meredith said softly, from across the pristine white desk of Victoria's temporary office. The space was small but elegant, a far cry from the sprawling penthouse she'd once called home. Everyone would understand. Victoria's laugh was brittle. Understand what? That Marcus Wellington's cast-off wife is too ashamed to show her face. She set the invitation down with deliberate care. "I built relationships with these people for over a decade. I won't let him take that away from me too." The divorce had been a masterpiece of legal cruelty. Marcus, with his team of shark lawyers, had painted her as a gold-digging socialite who had contributed nothing to their marriage except pretty arm candy. The prenup she'd naively signed at 22 had left her with almost nothing, just enough. Money to rent a modest apartment and start over at 34. What hurt most wasn't the financial devastation. It was the narrative he'd crafted. Marcus had convinced their social circle that Victoria was a frivolous society wife who'd grown bitter when he outgrew her. He'd whispered poison about her shopping habits, her lack of career ambitions, her desperate attempts to trap him with children that never came. The truth was far more complex. Victoria had spent 12 years being the perfect corporate wife, managing their social calendar, hosting dinner parties that sealed Marcus's business deals, and quietly pursuing her passion for interior design on the side. She'd turned their penthouse into a showcase that had been featured in Architectural Digest twice. But to Marcus, her work was just playing house with expensive furniture. Her phone buzzed. A text from her former friend, Camilla. "Saw the society. In pages. Marcus is bringing that young thing to Crimson Ball. So sorry, darling." Victoria's jaw tightened. Jasmine Cruz, 26, Instagram influencer, and Marcus's very public rebound. The girl had been posting photos of designer shopping sprees and exotic vacations, all funded by Victoria's ex-husband's guilt and midlife crisis. The most galling part was that Marcus was parading her around like a trophy, taking her to events where Victoria should have been by his side. "He thinks he's won," Victoria murmured, studying her reflection in the black computer screen. The woman looking back had lost weight, her cheekbones sharp beneath tired eyes. But there was something else there too, a steely determination that hadn't existed during her marriage. Her phone rang. The caller ID made her heart skip. "E. Blackwood." "Victoria." Ethan's deep voice was warm through the speaker. "I just wanted to confirm tonight. My driver will pick you up at 7. Ethan Blackwood was her secret weapon, though he didn't know it yet. They'd met 3 months ago when his father had commissioned her to redesign his Southampton estate. Ethan was brilliant, successful, and devastatingly handsome. Everything Marcus pretended to be. More importantly, he was Theodore Blackwood's son, a man whose influence reached the highest levels of government and business. "I'm having second thoughts," Victoria admitted. "Maybe this is too what? Too public, too bold." Ethan's chuckle was knowing. "Victoria, you've spent months hiding in the shadows. Tonight you step back into the light. Trust me." After ending the call, Victoria walked to her bedroom closet. Hanging there was the dress she'd commissioned, a midnight blue silk creation that had cost more than her rent. It was her armor, her statement piece, her declaration of war. Marcus thought he'd broken her. He'd built his new life on the ruins of their marriage, confident that Victoria would fade away into obscurity. Tonight, he would learn that some women don't break, they transform. and Victoria Sterling was about to become someone entirely new. The battle lines were drawn, the stage was set, and for the first time in months, Victoria smiled with genuine anticipation. The entrance. The Crimson Ball was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its grand staircase transformed into a red carpet spectacular. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs as Ethan's Bentley Mulsanne glided to a stop behind a line of luxury vehicles. Through the tinted windows, she could see the flash of cameras and the glittering crowd of Manhattan's elite. "Ready?" Ethan asked, his hand finding hers. He looked devastating in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, but it was his calm confidence that steadied her nerves. "As ready as someone can be for social warfare," Victoria replied, checking her reflection one final time in the compact mirror. The midnight blue silk gown hugged her figure perfectly, and the sapphire necklace, borrowed from Ethan's family collection, caught the light like captured stars. The car door opened, and Victoria stepped onto the red carpet. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Photographers who had been casually snapping pictures suddenly focused their lenses with laser precision. This wasn't just Victoria Sterling, the discarded ex-wife. This was Victoria Sterling with Ethan Blackwood, and that changed everything. "Victoria! Victoria!" the photographers called out, their flashes creating a strobe light symphony. She smiled. Graciously, her posture perfect, every inch the sophisticated woman she'd always been, but had somehow forgotten during the dark months of her divorce. Inside the museum's great hall, the reaction was even more pronounced. Victoria could feel the weight of 100 stares, the whispered conversations that followed in her wake like ripples on water. She'd attended this event for over a decade, but tonight she was seeing it through different eyes. These weren't just her former friends. They were witnesses to her resurrection. "Victoria, darling," Regina Ashworth, the gala's longtime host, swept toward them with barely contained excitement. "You look absolutely radiant." And Ethan, she air-kissed both his cheeks with the reverence reserved for true power. "Your father mentioned he might attend tonight?" "He wouldn't miss it," Ethan replied smoothly. "He's been quite impressed with Victoria's work on the Southampton project." Victoria felt a flutter of pride, mixed with nervousness. Ethan's father was one of the most influential men in the country, a presidential advisor whose opinion could make or break reputations. That's when she saw them. Marcus and Jasmine stood near the champagne fountain, his hand possessively placed. On her lower back, Marcus wore the same self-satisfied smirk he'd perfected during their divorce proceedings, while Jasmine preened in a scarlet-red dress that screamed expense but whispered desperation. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Victoria watched Marcus's expression shift from smug confidence to confusion to something approaching panic. His gaze traveled from her face to Ethan's, and she could practically see him calculating the implications. Jasmine noticed Marcus's distraction and followed his stare. Her perfectly contoured face fell as she recognized Victoria, not the broken woman from the gossip columns, but a transformed phoenix rising from the ashes of her marriage. "Is that—" Jasmine's voice carried across the room, shrill with disbelief. Marcus's jaw tightened. He whispered something sharp in Jasmine's ear, but Victoria could read his lips well enough after 12 years of marriage. He was telling her to be quiet, to not make a scene. But it was too late for discretion. Half the room had noticed the tension crackling between the former spouses. Victoria felt Ethan's hand settle reassuringly on her back. "Breathe," he murmured. "Let them come to you." And they did. Marcus approached with the false confidence of a man walking to his own execution, Jasmine trailing behind like a reluctant shadow. The crowd parted around them, sensing drama and positioning themselves for the best view. "Victoria," Marcus said when they were close enough to speak without shouting. His voice was carefully neutral, but Victoria could see the strain around his eyes. "You look... well, thank you," she replied coolly. "Marcus, Jasmine." The younger woman flinched at the casual dismissal in Victoria's tone. Marcus's eyes shifted to Ethan, and Victoria saw him struggling to place the face. Recognition dawned, slowly, followed by a sickly pallor. "Ethan Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "Marcus Wellington, Wellington Capital." Ethan shook his hand with polite indifference. "Of course. Victoria's mentioned you." The casual way he said it, as if Marcus was merely a footnote in Victoria's history, was more devastating than any insult could have been. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in social warfare, each word carefully chosen, each pause deliberately timed. Victoria watched Marcus realize that his ex-wife wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and with someone far more powerful than he could ever hope to be. The revelation. The moment Victoria had been unconsciously dreading and anticipating arrived with the force of a tidal wave. Theodore Blackwood Sr. entered the great hall, and the already charged atmosphere became electric. At 72, he moved with the assured grace of a man who had shaped presidencies and toppled governments with equal ease. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his tuxedo immaculate, but it was his eyes, sharp, intelligent, missing nothing, that commanded immediate attention. The crowd didn't part for Theodore Blackwood. It rearranged itself in his honor. Conversations halted mid-sentence, champagne glasses froze halfway to lips, and every head in the room turned toward the entrance. This was a man whose phone calls were answered by heads of state, whose opinions moved markets, whose presence at any event transformed it from significant to historic. Victoria felt her carefully maintained composure waver for just a moment. She had been working on the Southampton estate for months, but their interactions had been brief and professional. She had no idea what he truly thought of her, or if he even knew about her connection to Marcus. "Victoria," Theodore's voice carried across the room as he approached, and her heart nearly stopped. He wasn't just acknowledging her, he was seeking her out publicly, in front of everyone who mattered in New York society. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Please, we've been through this. It's Theodore." He smiled warmly, then did something that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. He took her hand and kissed it gently, a gesture of old-world respect that spoke volumes about how he regarded her. "I wanted to personally thank you again for the extraordinary work you've done on the estate. Margaret and I couldn't be more pleased." Victoria felt the room's energy shift around her like a physical force. Marcus, who had been standing nearby, with Jasmine, went rigid. His face cycled through several emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally a dawning horror as he began to understand what was happening. "The Southampton project has been one of my most rewarding challenges," Victoria replied, finding her footing. "Working with such incredible historical architecture while creating spaces for modern living, it's exactly the kind of work I've always dreamed of doing." Theodore's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "And that's precisely why I recommended you for the Washington project." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "The Washington project? Ah, you haven't heard yet." Theodore's smile was conspiratorial. "The First Lady has decided to redecorate portions of the White House residence. She asked for my recommendation, and I couldn't think of anyone more qualified than the woman who transformed our Southampton estate into something worthy of Architectural Digest's cover story." Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. Around them, she could hear the collective intake of breath from eavesdropping guests. A White House commission. It was the kind of career-defining opportunity that designers spent their entire lives hoping for. Regina Ashworth appeared beside them, her society hostess instincts kicking into overdrive. "Theodore, you simply must. Let me introduce Victoria properly to everyone tonight. This is absolutely thrilling news." "Actually," Theodore said, his tone becoming more serious, "there's something else. Victoria, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of inviting a few people here tonight, specifically to meet you. Senator Patricia Hayes is here. She chairs the Arts and Culture Committee. And David Morrison from the Smithsonian's Design Board." He paused, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I may have also mentioned your availability to redesign the embassy residence in London. The ambassador's wife has been looking for someone with exactly your aesthetic." Victoria struggled to process what she was hearing. These weren't just job opportunities, they were career-launching, reputation-making commissions that would establish her as one of the most sought-after designers in the world. Marcus, who had been standing close enough to hear every word, looked like he might be sick. His face had gone from pale to a sickly green color. Jasmine clutched his arm, her own expression confused and slightly desperate, as she tried to understand why everyone was suddenly treating Marcus's nobody ex-wife like royalty. "I don't know what to say," Victoria managed, her composure finally cracking slightly to reveal genuine emotion. "I'm honored by your confidence in my work." "Nonsense," Theodore waved dismissively. "Talent recognizes talent. And speaking of talent," he turned to his son with obvious pride, "Ethan tells me you two have become quite close. I couldn't be more delighted." The subtext was clear to everyone within earshot. Victoria Sterling wasn't just a talented designer who had caught Theodore Blackwood's professional attention. She was someone he was welcoming into his family circle, someone worthy of his son's affections and his own paternal approval. Victoria glanced over at Marcus, who looked like he was watching his own execution in slow motion. This was the woman he had dismissed as a frivolous society wife, the woman he had claimed contributed nothing of value to their marriage. And here she was, being courted by the most powerful family in America for her professional talents, while being treated with the kind of respect he could only dream of commanding. The revelation was complete. Victoria Sterling hadn't just survived her divorce. She had used it as a catalyst to become someone far more formidable than she had ever been as Marcus Wellington's wife. Part 4. The Confrontation. The inevitable collision came during the cocktail hour in the museum's Temple of Dender, where the ancient Egyptian temple provided an incongruously timeless backdrop for very modern drama. Victoria had been graciously accepting congratulations from a steady stream of society figures when Marcus finally cornered her near the reflecting pool. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Jasmine hovered behind him like a nervous shadow, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Victoria turned slowly, her sapphire necklace catching the soft lighting. "Do we? I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss, Marcus." "Don't play games with me," he hissed, stepping closer. "You planned this. This whole thing, showing up here with Blackwood, the mysterious design career you never mentioned. The design career I never mentioned." Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused. "Marcus, I talked about my work constantly. You just never listened. Every dinner party I hosted for your clients, every weekend I spent selecting furniture for our home, every portfolio I showed you, you dismissed it all as playing house." Jasmine finally found her voice, stepping forward with the kind of false bravado that comes from Instagram confidence. "You're pathetic," she said, her young voice sharp with venom. "Showing up here, trying to make Marcus jealous with your sugar daddy." The words were barely out of her mouth when the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes, a steel that had been forged in the fires of public humiliation and private rebuilding, made Jasmine instinctively step backward. "Sugar daddy," Victoria repeated softly, and several nearby conversations faltered as people turned to listen. "How interesting. Tell me, Jasmine, what do you call a man who pays for your designer clothes, your luxury vacations, and your Manhattan apartment in exchange for your company?" The implication hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Jasmine's face flushed scarlet, matching her dress in all the wrong ways. Marcus moved protectively in front of his girlfriend. "You have no right." "I have every right." Victoria cut him off, her voice carrying just enough to ensure their growing audience could hear every word. "I have the right that comes from spending 12 years building the social connections you're now benefiting from. I have the right that comes from hosting the dinner parties that landed you half your clients. I have the right that comes from designing the penthouse that impressed your investors enough to fund your last 3 deals." She took a step closer, her voice becoming softer, more dangerous. "But most of all, Marcus, I have the right that comes from being discarded like yesterday's newspaper by a man who convinced himself he was trading up, only to discover he'd thrown away a Picasso for a cheap reproduction." The crowd around them had grown larger, drawn by the magnetic pull of high society drama. Victoria could see familiar faces in her peripheral vision. The Astors, the Vanderbilts, society reporters with their phones discreetly recording every moment. "You think you've won something," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly, "but everyone here knows what this really is. You're using Blackwood to get back at me." "Using him?" Victoria's voice rose just enough to carry to the back of the gathered crowd. "Marcus, you poor deluded man. Ethan Blackwood doesn't need to be used by anyone. He's not some insecure middle manager desperate to prove his worth by trading wives like luxury cars." She gestured elegantly toward where Ethan stood with his father, both men watching the confrontation with the calm confidence of people who had never doubted their own worth. "That is what a secure, successful man looks like. That is what partnership with an equal looks like. And the fact that you can't see the difference tells everyone here exactly why our marriage was doomed from the start." The new beginning. The evening's crescendo came during the gala's main program, as guests settled into the museum's grand auditorium for the charity auction and special presentations. Victoria sat beside Ethan in the front row, Theodore on her other side, a positioning that spoke volumes to everyone in attendance. The whispers had died down, replaced by a respectful murmur that acknowledged the seismic shift in Manhattan's social hierarchy. Regina Ashworth took the stage, her silver gown shimmering under the spotlights. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's auction, I have some extraordinary announcements that perfectly embody the spirit of art's patronage that brings us together." Victoria felt Ethan's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support and something deeper, a connection that had been building for months and had crystallized into something unshakable during tonight's trials. First, Regina continued, "I'm thrilled to announce that the White House has commissioned renowned interior designer Victoria Sterling to oversee the redecoration of several residence spaces. This historic project will showcase American artistry at the highest levels of government." The applause was thunderous, but Victoria barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. She rose gracefully, acknowledging the ovation with a smile that was equal parts gratitude and triumph. In her peripheral vision, she could see Marcus slumped in his seat 15 rows back, his face a mask of devastated realization. "But that's not all." Regina's voice cut through the applause. "Ms. Sterling has also been selected to design the new American ambassador's residence in London, a project that will represent our nation's aesthetic values to the world." As Victoria settled back into her seat, Theodore leaned over to whisper, "There's one more surprise coming, my dear. I hope you're ready." Before she could ask what he meant, Ethan was standing, his tall frame commanding attention as the applause died down. Victoria's heart stopped as she watched him reach into his jacket pocket, his eyes never leaving her face. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's excellent acoustics. "6 months ago, my father asked me to oversee a contractor for our family estate. I expected to meet a competent professional. I never expected to find the woman who would change my life." The audience held its collective breath as Ethan dropped to one knee beside Victoria's chair. The ring he produced was a stunning vintage sapphire surrounded by diamonds, clearly an heirloom piece that spoke of generations of Blackwood family history. "You've shown me what it means to build something beautiful from the ground up, to take broken pieces and create something even stronger than what came before." His voice was steady, but Victoria could see the emotion in his eyes. "Victoria Sterling, will you marry me?" The auditorium erupted in gasps and applause, but Victoria heard only her own heartbeat and Ethan's voice. This wasn't just a proposal, it was a public declaration that she was worthy of the Blackwood name, worthy of joining one of America's most powerful families. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, Victoria caught a glimpse of Marcus in the crowd. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse, which she realized he was. The woman he had discarded as worthless was about to become more powerful than he could ever dream of being. The evening concluded with Victoria and Ethan at the center of a receiving line of congratulations that read like a who's who of American influence. Senators, ambassadors, CEOs, and cultural luminaries all pressed forward to offer their best wishes and, not coincidentally, to position themselves favorably with the future Mrs. Blackwood. As they finally escaped to a quiet corner of the museum's rooftop garden, Victoria looked out over the glittering lights of Manhattan. 6 months ago, she had been broken, discarded, written off as yesterday's news. Tonight, she was engaged to one of the most eligible men in the world and embarking on a career that would establish her as a designer of international renown. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, following her gaze across the city. Victoria thought of Marcus, probably spending the ride home trying to explain to Jasmine why his ex-wife's engagement was front-page news, while theirs would never even merit a mention in the society pages. She thought of all the people who had written her off, who had seen her divorce as an ending rather than a beginning. "None," she said, turning back to the man who had seen her worth when she had forgotten it herself. "Not a single one." In the distance, the city sparkled with infinite possibility, and Victoria Sterling, soon to be Victoria Blackwood, knew that her greatest chapter was just beginning. She had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover that you were never really lost at all. The comeback was complete. The Queen had reclaimed her throne, and this time it was one she had built entirely for herself.